Here's how to play relaxed accent taps. I often see people when they're doing like an accent and they try and get a tap after this, they will squeeze the stick either at the fulcrum or all of the fingers to stop the stick from rebounding, from going back up. Because we don't want to have accent taps that are like this when you're playing on drumline. We want to have very distinct accent taps that are going on here. When I'm doing this, I'm not squeezing the stick. In fact, I can do this without even having my front two fingers on here and just play this with the back fingers only on contact on the stick. That's what you want to be able to get to with this. There's a spacing change between an accent where my hand is more open and a tap where my hand is more closed. So the amount of space for the stick to move is changing, but I'm not actually applying any kind of pressure in my hand to squeeze and stop the stick from doing that motion. So one way that you can actually practice the accent tap, practice it with your wrist and to just move your wrist like this. And that's your accent tap right there. All you're gonna do is then just like slide the stick into there and not change anything about your wrist to be able to get the accent taps in there. So if I'm playing an accent tap, I'm opening up some space for the stick to be able to get like a full height. And then when I play the tap immediately after this, it's just a stroke that starts up and ends down. And so all I'm doing is just stopping my wrist and having less space in here than if I were to play legato full strokes like this. To let the stick bounce back up, I have space like this. That space makes it so the stick rebounds. But if I stop the space, it's closed off, it makes it so the stick will stop with my wrist. So you can play accent taps like this by working on this. Now, a really good exercise for working on the accent taps and working through the 4 different stroke types is 2 up, 2 down. So up, up, down, down. What are the 4 strokes types and how does that work on that? We have an up stroke that starts up and ends up. So up, up. We have an up stroke that starts up and ends down. We have a down stroke, a stroke that starts down and ends down, so like this. And then a stroke that starts down and ends up. So up, 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 down, 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 up. So when you play tap, tap, accent, accent, tap, tap, up, up, down, down, that works on all 4 stroke types so that you can practice this. So again, you can practice it with your wrist only. You can practice it by taking your fingers off the stick to experiment with just the different spacing change with the back fingers of the stick. And then you can practice it using the up, up, down, down, the accent relaxer and the tap relaxer. And the exercise is just 2 up, 2 down. And for this particular one, what it's doing is it's starting with everything at tap height and you slowly raise the accents. So it's 4-inch accents, then 6, then 9, and then 12. And then it lowers it so that it's 9, 6, 4, and then all taps. The accent relaxer is the opposite of this, all at one height. And then it slowly lowers the taps. So you're going down all the way down to 3-inch taps and then all the way back up to full height. So these are 2 excellent and opposite ways that you can work on 2 up, 2 down to keep your taps relaxed or your accents relaxed. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. How is Moeller stroke different than just like a normal stroke? So Moeller stroke, instead of having the bead being the initiator of the motion, like the thing that moves first, whenever you're playing, Moeller will actually have the wrist bend and move to create like a whipping motion so that the bead is almost the last point of contact or the last point of motion when you're playing like this. So instead of playing like this, you will play like this when doing like an accent. Now, if you're doing something like triplets, if you're doing it with Moeller, you're going to slowly move the wrist up so you can get that whipping stroke in there on the accent. And this might be fine on drum kit, but on drumline, it's not going to sound great. So what's happening is you're slowly changing the angle of the stick, which the more it angles, the less sound quality you can get out of it as opposed to playing like this. So the more angled, the worse it's going to be. So if you play with an extreme Moeller technique, it actually changes your sound quality. So this is fine when you're the only drummer playing. In fact, it might make it sound better than less robotic if you're doing it on drum kit. But for rudimental, we want to have it sound robotic because we want to play the exact same way as everybody else who is also playing the same thing on the same instrument. And we don't want to have strokes like this. So a modified Moeller is often used with rudimental drummers in order to get some weight or power behind the stroke without making a huge change in the angle of the smaller interior notes or the taps before an accent. So if you're working on Moeller technique whenever you're playing, think about how much of an angle you're going to get and how much that might change the sound quality of those lower notes when you're working on this. But it is the wrist moving before the bead of the stick if you choose to work on Moeller stroke. This is what your right hand plays when you're playing a flam accent. This diddle right here is what your right hand does when you are playing a flam drag. Adding in one left hand at a time, so the grace note right here. Then the next line, you're adding in another left hand, so this accent right here. And then you're adding in another left hand. And then we have just straight flam drags for a whole line. And then you're taking away one right hand. So get rid of this right hand, and you get rid of this right hand, then you get rid of this right hand, and then finally you get rid of the very first note at the start of each one of the measures. This makes it so that you are working on your hands in isolation, slowly layering it in so that you're working on both hands together, and then you're going back into isolation, working on just the other hand. So this is a fantastic way to refine each one of the hands as well as when you put them together. So I highly recommend checking out Flam Accent Builder, the Cheese Builder, the Flam Drag Builder, and the Flam 5 Builder variations of this one. Variation 2 of each one of those rudiments, the Cheese, Drag, and 5, has a little bit of a different pattern here. Just an accent, diddle on 2, flam accent, and then a flam drag. And then we do everything so that it's accent on 2, and it's the same pattern, diddle, flam, flam drag. And then accent on 3, diddle, flam, flam drag. Variation 3, accent, a diddle on 2, a flam accent, and then a flam drag. But then we're shifting the flam drag over. So now it's a diddle on 3, a flam on 2, and a flam drag on 2. So this is shifting the flam drag over, permutating it across the subdivision on here. Sometimes when students are playing like inverted accents or upstroke accents is another way of kind of thinking of it. There's a tendency like when you're playing that first tap, is it like kind of crescendos like that, so they like start at like grace note height and like kind of work their way up. Make sure that that first stroke is like a solid note and not like slowly kind of creeping his way up. That's bad. Don't do that. How do you get more velocity on taps? Excellent question. Pyramid exercises, a lot of people use. However, there's an exercise called rebound that's specifically designed to work on your velocity strokes, where you are unable to see the stroke motion because you're trying to go as fast as possible. Throwing it into the head without any kind of tension in your hand. So you're not squeezing to get the stroke. There's no power behind this. Like look at any snare line. No offense, I march snare, but most snare drummers are very weak. They don't have like a huge upper body or anything like that because you don't need the muscles to do this. It's all about rotation speed and wrist or finger speed. Play this at tap height, but focus on a very loud but fast stroke on your taps. So this exercise I did every single day with the drum lines that I was teaching. Another one that might be fun to work on is a progressive and regressive double stops, which is a fancy way of saying add in a note every time. It's not a power thing, it's a speed issue in order to get the sound quality out of the head.